What is up with transfers in Pennsylvania? This seems to be such a major issue. And after traveling home recently and seeing this article about Wyatt Henson, future Iowa Hawkeye, not even be able to compete in the Pennsylvania postseason tournament, this seems to be some sort of issue. So let's stop stalling and start talking about this crazy news. What's going on, wrestling fans? My name is Josiah, and welcome to Fanco Wrestling. On this channel, we talk all about wrestling news, tips, and lifestyle. And this week is something big in Wyatt Henson and not competing in postseason. If you're interested in news like this, and if you're interested in this discussion, make sure that you hit that subscribe button because it really helps out the channel. Plus, it lets you keep in the conversation and keep discussing these type of things. So as I mentioned, this article was very intriguing to me, and it did make national news as far as other news sites like Intermat, Open Mat, Flow Wrestling, all kind of reporting on this issue in Wyatt Henson not being able to compete in the postseason. Now, Henson is a Pennsylvania wrestler, or he was until he transferred to Missouri last season, where he actually won a state title. Then after transferring back to Pennsylvania to the same high school where he originally was his freshman year, that's Waynesburg High School, at Waynesburg, he's not able to compete in the postseason. And he was declared ineligible by the WPIAL. And just from this article, kind of what it says here is at last week's WPIAL board meeting, and this was back in towards the end of November. At last week's WPIAL board meeting, Henson, a junior, that's the class of 2021, he'll be, was declared ineligible to compete in the regular season. Actually eligible to compete in the regular season, but ineligible to compete in the postseason. The board cited the PIAA transfer rule for athletes who make a move after their sophomore season. So, as I mentioned, he can compete in the regular season, but not the postseason. Is this an issue? Is this a problem? And what is the transfer rule? Well, first of all, the transfer rule, I have it up right here, states that any athlete who transfers schools after their sophomore year, after 10th grade in high school, is ineligible to compete in district or PIAA playoffs in any sport that they competed in the previous year. So since he wrestled last year in Missouri, he's no longer able to compete in the postseason in wrestling. Now, if he played football or basketball or something else, I guess he would be able to compete, but that's really not that big of a deal. The rule went into effect actually last year, and it's already affecting a guy like Wyatt Henson. Now, can this eligibility be waived? Yes, depending on if there's a hardship in this athlete's life. Now, the rule says that development, spiritual, or social reasons are not hardship. However, moving due to a parent's employment can qualify as a hardship. So we've seen many cases like this in previous years. I mean, over the past 10 years, really, things like this have been happening where wrestlers are ruled ineligible to compete. They end up kind of going after it, going after that ruling, appealing it from the WPIAL to the PIAA level. A lot of times, wrestlers are allowed to compete. I mean, I would say 95% of the time that I've seen a wrestler appeal a WPIAL decision, he's allowed to compete in the postseason. I think this is a little bit unique of a scenario because it's really one of the biggest wrestlers in Pennsylvania recently who has had this happen to him, especially with this new rule. Now, as far as who Wyatt Henson is, as I said already, he's going to be a future Iowa Hawkeye. He won the Missouri state title last year at Christian Brothers College High School. He placed in the PIAA a few years ago, put up a couple tough matches in the PIAA, and wrestled really well. I believe he placed 5th in the state in his freshman year. So is this an issue? Well, it's tough because you see guys in college kind of transfer often, and they transfer for multiple different reasons. Coaches, training partners, things like that. And I think this could be a similar scenario. And disclaimer, I don't know everything going on in Wyatt Henson's life, okay? I don't know exactly why he's moving from Pennsylvania to Missouri to Pennsylvania. I don't claim to know every little thing about his personal life. I'm just speaking about this on a bigger standard and why it is an issue, why it should be an issue, why it isn't an issue. And I think the biggest thing is that wrestlers shouldn't be allowed to just transfer from school to school to school to school every year. Because in that case, you turn public schools into what are essentially private schools who can then recruit guys. And you should not be allowed to recruit guys in high school because then you just get stacked teams. I mean, let's look at like a Bethlehem Catholic in Pennsylvania. It's just things that happen every single year. And of course, the comment that I read all the time, the comment that always comes up whenever I'm reading news like this break on Twitter is, well, let's look back at that Ken and Mac team back in 2010 through 2012, a team which I coincidentally was a part of, and I knew what was going on at the time. And no, there was no recruiting going on. No, there was none of that going on, but people always like to call everything out. Waynesburg this year is competing heavily for a team title, not only in the WPIAL, but possibly in the state. And with Henson coming back, that's going to be big for the program. Should this be allowed? I don't know. I don't think that... I think that it would be fair that he can't compete in postseason, but then again, he's just a high school athlete, and you kind of feel bad for him if he can't compete in postseason, whether it's just individual or team, because in most sports, you don't have both of those things. You have a team postseason, that's it, like in football. In wrestling, you have individuals and team postseason. And I'm not sure if he's going to be out of the running of both of those things, if he's allowed to compete in, he's allowed to compete in regular season. So that's the topic of everything going on there back in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania with Wyatt Henson. What do you think about this topic? Is it an issue? Is it something that needs to be solved? Because this is just kind of an issue that's been coming up recently. So please leave your comments below.